Hello and welcome to another segment of Interviews That Matter. I'm your host Raj Mehta. Friends, in this segment we bring those guests who influence our lives. This includes elected officials, policy makers, heads of major organizations and other dignitaries. It is my sincere hope that the knowledge brought in by these guests will help our community. Today we have such guest. His name is Bill Flanagan. He is a retired Nassau County Police Commissioner. Bill has tremendous amount of knowledge on law enforcement and policing. Mr. Flanagan, thank you so much for coming.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate your time, and we really want to explore your mind. We want to dive into your mind, and we want to take out as much as we can in this interview. So I know you for a long time, and one of the smartest men that I know. So I really hope that you give our viewers a detailed explanations of everything that we touch upon.
Yeah. Well, give it my best shot here, Raj. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for inviting me.
So let's go with your background first. For the viewers' benefit.
My background really, I spent 29 years in the Nassau County Police Department.
Right.
I started in the early 80s as a patrol police officer. Spent a few years on patrol, went into some specialized narcotics units. I got promoted. I spent a lot of time in investigative areas, in areas of narcotics, money laundering, asset forfeiture. I became a union official for some period of time, and I finished up my career as the second deputy commissioner of police, and I was responsible for special projects, the institution of some new technology into the police department, a new look at crime and how the police department reacted to crime within the county. Although this is probably one of the safest places to live in the United States. There are areas where violent crime was of some issue, and we put into place during a tenure some very innovative programs relative to combating crime, domestic violence, and other things that are key to the safety of the people within the county.
Before, you started just out of college within the county, or what did you do before?
No, I worked in a series of different places. I worked for an engineering company. I worked for a very large construction firm doing public works projects. So I was familiar from a business standpoint before I became a police officer of the world outside of governmental service. When I became a police officer, I found I had an affinity for the work. I liked helping people, which is what I think most people go into policing and law enforcement specifically for. And as you know, having some great knowledge of how policing works here in the metropolitan area, policing here is a little bit different from other places. We're very community oriented and have been for 75 years or better. With the deep interaction with the community comes a trust between community and police. And I think what you see going on in other places in the country today, it shows how important that is. The egalitarian policing, the trust that communities put in law enforcement can't be stressed enough. You need to establish with stakeholders in communities a trust between law enforcement and those communities in order to foster good things that can happen, program-centric kinds of things instead of just enforcement-oriented projects or programs. Enforcement's important. There are really bad people out there.
Right.
Those people should be dealt with and should be marginalized and mitigated as much as possible so that they don't negatively impact the good people in society. So I think you see the police departments in the New York metropolitan area, the NYPD, the biggest police department in the United States, the Nassau and the Suffolk County police departments, doing a great job in general in dealing with crime and other issues that face society from a law enforcement standpoint.
when you say the policing was different from the other places and it's more community centric, right? So basically you're interacting with the community as large and then trying to get some information from them, or how does it work? Like what do you do? How do you get community involved?
Well, it really comes from a baseline of understanding who the people in the community are to start with, who the stakeholders in the community are. We can start right with, let's go from the top. We can go from elected public officials. When elected public officials understand
Right.
the importance of police in a community and how to effectively utilize the police as a portal to other areas of governmental service. If you think about it, people normally call the police in times of distress.
Right.
So what happens, a lot of these times of distress really aren't police problems per se. They're problems that can be mitigated by other potentially governmental authorities. So the police in those situations act as an entry point into the system. If police officers are trained properly and they know how to talk to people, they can assist those people in their endeavors in getting into the system. So that's really the first level. Then you get to the stakeholders within the community itself, and they may be the religious people, the business leaders of the community, the civic leaders, people who are innately familiar with and understand the need for community involvement to get things done. And we, for decades here, and in the last 25 years really, have pushed deeper into that understanding of the dynamic between all of those people, the elected officials, the religious leaders, the business leaders, the civic people, and then the man in the street, how to bring them together and work toward a common goal, which is really safety. That's the overriding mission of a law enforcement agency. It's the safety of the public. And I think you see that the Nassau County Police Department in particular has done that very, very well over the last few decades. And it is from a total involvement from specialized units in the police department, from the commanding officers of the police precincts that cover the different areas, and even at the managerial ranks, you see high-ranking people within the police department, and not just the Nassau County Police Department, but NYPD and Suffolk County Police Departments, out among the community, attending many functions, which is important.
Right.
They see police, law enforcement personnel in a setting outside of a police-dominated atmosphere. At the same time, those law enforcement agencies, of course, invite stakeholders into the facilities of the police department. All three major police departments here regularly hold meetings within their assembly halls and things for members of the community, business people, and the like, to keep them informed on what's going on in policing. That to have that open, clear, and unambiguous, is what I call it, communication channel, is so key when things happen that need to be explained. And again, in recent, the last year or so, with things that have been in the media about law enforcement and citizen involvement, some of them on their face very negative. A lot of those things probably could have been mitigated if those police agencies, those law enforcement agencies, had open lines of communication with community stakeholders. Unfortunately, in some of those places they didn't. In others they did, and they're dealt with in a little different fashion. I think to the betterment of everyone involved.
It's really a trust factor, correct?
It is a trust factor, and if you think about it, law enforcement people in the United States have tremendous responsibilities. With those responsibilities, also come, in an examination by the public of the actions of the police, need to be taken in context. And again, most successful police agencies have a very robust program where they invite people from outside to come in and see how police procedure is done, why things take place. The Nassau County Police Department has a Citizens Police Academy where people are invited on a regular basis to go through a formal training that's pretty much mirrors the training of a new police recruit. So they get a better understanding of why things are done when they're out in the street. And I think most people walk away from that with a much better appreciation of the dynamic situations that police officers in the street encounter on a regular basis.
So this is like basically an announced events, like, for example, if somebody wants to attend this kind of, see, it's like common people, right? They don't know what is the job of a police. I mean, they think that, oh, this guy is rude and thing like that, right? It's a different impression. But if they know the other side, then they would better,
Obviously, and let's face it, most of everyone in the United States' vision of policing comes from television.
Right.
It comes from highly stylized shows about television, and from the time I was a child, whether it's Adam 12, about the Los Angeles Police Department, Hawaii 5-0, Starsky and Hutch, Miami Vice. The truth is that in most policing is really, and I don't really like to use the word routine, but it is the daily interaction of a police officer on patrol with someone who he or she encounters, either in the street or by result of getting a 911 call. So those people are brought into daily contact with people. And what modern policing really is about giving the people who do the job a better understanding of how to interact with people across a wide range of socioeconomic values, different demographics, different ethnicities, different cultures. So the more that the initial responder to some person's request or call has the ability to step outside their own bias and what comes with them in their life experience, probably the better off we all are. And successful police departments do a good job in training people how to do that. It comes from the selection of candidates. In New York, you can't get a job in the police department without taking a civil service test. Doesn't matter who you know, doesn't matter who your family is, doesn't matter where you come from. If you sit for the test and pass the test, which is very competitive, the police departments in this area regularly get tens of thousands of applicants for just maybe a few hundred jobs on some rotating basis. If you get through that, there's a very robust background investigation. There are actually investigators sent out and knock on doors of your neighbors and people you provide for references. There's some significant psychological screening. In most cases, there is a polygraph today. So really, the police entities are looking for the best people who can be trained to understand what the role of the police in society is today. And the role of police in society really is to keep people safe. But in the process of doing that, the police have also become a lot of other things to people. Just as teachers and school systems have become more to people than they were probably when you and I were children. Little different change in the roles.
So they have been given a lot of training before even they go out on the street.
Yes.
Training is the most important thing, because
training is key. Training for new police officers and training on an ongoing basis for police officers is also. It's about reinforcement in the things that they learn, and it's also about learning new techniques and learning from things that have happened, things that are at the cutting edge of both technology and maybe social change in things. Don't forget, a policeman's career could span 30 or 40 years. So during that time, adults change and society changes. So the way that we policed in the 60s is not the way that we police today in 2015. It is different. But you're exactly right when you say that the average person doesn't really know what the police do on a regular basis. And police organizations, especially here, are very complex. In Nassau and Suffolk County, about the same size population, 1.3 million people, maybe in each. Suffolk's a little bigger. Police departments of about 2,500 people. That's a lot of people to police over a relatively large geographic area. New York City Police Department has in excess of 30,000 people policing a population of at least 8 million. So the way you police is different. The police department in the city of New York has the ability to put hundreds of people on the street at any given time in response to something. The Nassau and Suffolk County Police Department really can't do that based on a number of people you have. So there's a core of people on patrol every day that you're familiar with police cars driving around. They're assigned sectors or beats. That police officer is responsible for what happens in that area realistically. He is guided by communications from a central dispatch location. When you call 911, they look and they see who's available in the area near where you are, and they send that police car, or typically 2 police cars, to go to answer your complaint. The next level is every precinct has its own staffing. There's a commanding officer of that precinct. He's responsible for those people out on patrol. There are other factors that exist within that precinct structure. There are detective squads. Those people do the follow-up investigation if it's required from the report that police officer may have taken on the street. And then the next step is there are specialized units that come under the headquarters commands. And those range from everything from emergency service units. You've seen them. They'll respond to accidents and explosions and things. They've highly trained, specialized skills. There are specialized detective squads, robbery squads, crimes against property squads, homicide squads. Those specialized squads typically take care of pattern kinds of crimes that are recurring over a larger geographical area over some period of time, as opposed to individualized kinds of burglaries or robberies or things. And then you have the support structure of the police department. Now, police departments have hundreds of vehicles, significant infrastructure, both from a technology standpoint and a physical plant. And then you have the managerial structure of the police department, which would include inspectors, chiefs, and commissioners. And every police department is structured a little different, but apparently they are essentially all hierarchical based entities. They are paramilitary. Obviously, people wear uniforms. There is a rank structure. That rank is essentially governed by civil service. And people take tests to advance through different ranks until they get to a certain point where the ranks are then appointed by the head of their agency. And those are, again, managerial kinds, administrative kinds of ranks. So it's a pretty complex process. There are huge budgets involved. So the police commissioner in one of these 3 police departments is responsible for a budget, in New York City's case, of billions of dollars, and in Nassau and Suffolk County, hundreds of millions of dollars. So they're relatively large organizations. The people that do this kind of work at that managerial level have been to typically many kinds of managerial classes and conferences. Training at that level is important. The training at the level of detectives is important. Detectives from these police departments travel across the country, the same kind of seminars and conferences and things, expanding their technical and investigative abilities. And police officers are usually trained on an ongoing basis in-house in a police academy setting. Subject matter experts from within the police department and without will come in and talk to people on the latest trends in things like investigations, how to talk to people, how to deal with emerging social kinds of issues. So it's an ongoing and very, very dynamic process. It's not stagnant. It's not, you can't come into this job today and expect to just coast for 20 years. It doesn't happen. It's a very, very involved profession. And it takes people who really put a lot into it to do it successfully.
When a police person stops someone on the street, what are their rights?
Well, it depends on why the police officer is stopping you. I don't know any police officer who will randomly drive down the street and just decide, I'm going to stop that guy for some reason. The police have what's called a reasonable right of inquiry. Even though I may be a police officer, I'm still a citizen. And in public, we can walk up to each other, and I can walk up to you and say, hi, I'm Bill.
Right.
And you could look at me like I'm nuts and walk away, or you can choose to engage in a conversation.
Right.
So let's have a little clearer scenario. At
Right.
some point, someone calls 911
Right.
and says, "There's someone walking down my street. He's wearing a black trench coat, and he's got sneakers on, and he's got a pair of gloves." But that's today. It's August. It's 75 degrees out. So that call goes to communications. Communications sends a police car. Bill is calling about this suspicious person.
Right.
So that person in the police car gets the call. Suspicious person on, Express Drive.
Right.
The police show up, and he sees this individual walking down the middle of the street with a pair of gloves on and a trench coat. So he stops his car, and he gets out, and he approaches the person and says, "Good afternoon. Excuse me. I'd like to talk to you." And the person turns around and says, "Sure." Well, at that point, me as the police officer could pretty much ask, "Where are you coming from? Who are you? Do you need any help? Is there anything I can help you with?" That person has the right to walk away, has the right to say, "I don't want to talk to you."
Okay.
Okay, so we're sort of left with an ambiguous situation, aren't we?
Right.
What do you do as a police officer at that point?
Right.
Somebody's called. I'm here because someone is concerned about this person walking down the street with a trench coat and gloves on in 80-degree weather. So it's incumbent upon that police officer to make some decisions here.
Okay.
Is that person potentially a danger to himself or someone else?
Right.
That gives me the ability to go a little further maybe and say, "Hey, listen, I'd really like to talk to you. I'd really like to talk to you about whether are you okay? Do you live around here? Where are you going?" That kind of thing. So it's really a dynamic situation there. Let's change it up a little. It's 8 o'clock at night,
Right.
and a police officer is driving down the street, and he hears glass breaking, and he's in front of a store, and he sees someone running out of that store. He gets out of his police car and runs after that person and tells them to stop. They don't stop. He continues to run, and at some point he catches up to them, and he puts his hands on him to restrain him. At that point, your level of suspicion has changed. So the things I can do change, and we would all think that that's reasonable.
Right.
Correct.
Right.
So Raj, it's really about, it's situationally dependent about what you can do and can't do. In general, the police can approach people and talk to them.
Okay.
I've run after that person fleeing from that store through the broken window.
Right.
Now, what does that tell a reasonable person? That person was probably inside that store.
Right.
The window's
Right.
broken.
Right.
He probably doesn't belong there.
Right.
At that point, I have and I catch him. I have the ability at that point to make sure that he's not carrying anything that's going to be potentially used to injure me or someone else.
Right.
So I can pat that person down. In fact, I can probably handcuff that person and detain them. Okay, that's reasonable. I would think that you would agree that's reasonable, and most
Yep.
people would.
Yeah.
So really, where the issues lie is when people feel that they've been unjustly stopped,
Right.
or
Right.
singled out for something.
Right.
Depending on where the police work, they may see all Caucasian people. They may see a more diverse section of our society. But that's the group of people that they're working with. When you stop people for whatever reason, and again, I'm going to go back and tell you that most police don't stop anyone unless there is a reason, unless they've been told that there's a person of a particular color, a particular height, wearing particular clothes, someone fits that description, and they're being sent by the person at the other end of the radio to go investigate something.
Okay.
Or somebody on the street stops them and tells them essentially the same thing. So you have the ability to walk up to people and try to engage in that conversation. It has to rise to the level of reasonableness to be able to detain someone. You always need to be reasonable under the circumstances that it's there. So there really is no clear-cut
Answer.
there really isn't. I mean, people in the United States have rights. You do have the right not to talk to the police.
Right.
If you don't want to talk to the police, you don't have to talk to the police. And I tell people that all the time. That doesn't mean you shouldn't cooperate with the police.
Right.
And the police have other methods of investigating things. So I know, today we're dealing with issues of what should be properly called stop, question, and frisk. There's three parts to that, right?
Right.
Again, we've talked about, I'm allowed to stop you
Right.
and engage you in conversation.
Right.
You're allowed to walk away.
Right.
I can ask you questions. You don't have to answer me, for the most part. The frisk part seems to be the part that gives people a lot of problems.
Right.
It really depends, again, on the situation and the circumstances about whether a police officer can frisk someone. And there are very bright line court decisions about when you can do those kind of things. And generally, it's about the totality of the circumstances. You have to put everything in context. Who are we? Where are we? What just happened? What do I, as the police officer, know?
Right.
Do I know that 5 minutes ago, 500 feet away, a candy store was robbed by someone with a gun, wearing a red jacket and green sneakers, and standing in front of me is a man wearing a red jacket and green sneakers.
Right.
So a reasonable person would expect that one might have something to do with the other,
Right.
and there was a gun involved, or what
Right.
appeared to be a gun.
Right.
So for the safety of myself and other people, I think that a reasonable person would say to me that maybe we should pat that person down to see if he has anything.
Right.
First, I would probably ask that person, do you have anything that could be dangerous to me or someone else on you?
But why would he say yes?
Well, people, believe it or not, people do say yes. And I think one of the advantages of the burgeoning utilization of body cameras by the police
Right.
is that the average person in the public is going to see that a lot of people, the truth is stranger than fiction. A lot of people do tell the truth regardless.
Oh, okay.
And they will say, yes, I have a knife in my pocket, or I have, and maybe there's an innocent reason for them to have the knife in the pocket. But people do, you and most people would really be surprised.
Oh, yeah?
And I think the more you see these videos from the police perspective, you're going to see more and more that these things do occur. So that's really, in a nutshell, the ability to have encounters with the police on the street. You do have the right to not to talk to the police. The police do have a right to detain you at some point to clear up ambiguous situations, like the one I just talked
Right.
about.
Right.
That guy with the green jacket
Right.
that just stuck up the red jacket, and, just stuck up the place. I think I have the ability, I know I have the ability to keep you there until we investigate whether in fact you're the person who may be involved in that.
Interesting.
Reasonable, right? I
Right.
mean, that's what we're really talking about. We're talking about the reasonableness of intrusion into your personal space.
So
You don't
there's-
have to talk to me, but that doesn't mean that I have to let you go all the time either.
Oh, okay, that's what the.
Right.
So I think that it involves psychological training also, because when you talk to people, like you have to analyze the situation like this.
A lot of it's got to do with your ability to assess situations.
Right.
I am a proponent of slowing things down. When we slow things down and we have the ability to explain to people what we're doing,
Right.
it usually turns out better. That being said, there are instances in policing
Right.
and decisions that need to be made very, very quickly.
Right.
Look, there's the potential for change here, though. Most police in the United States are armed for good reason.
Right.
It's to protect, frankly, the police officer themselves,
right.
and the public
and the
from
public.
from potentially
Right.
some person wielding a weapon or whatever.
Right.
But there's always the conversation about, well, in the United Kingdom, most police aren't armed. Well, in the United Kingdom, most people don't have firearms either, the people that police come in contact with. But they do have other things. They have personal weapons.
Right.
They have fists and feet, and knives and bludgeons and things. And you always need to deal with that, and the police in the UK do. They just do it maybe a little differently than most places in the United States. There, they think about putting space between the bad guy or the potential bad guy or the person with a weapon and themselves, and using other kinds of tactics to potentially de-escalate the situation or to resolve it. Now, we've got an issue in the United States with people with mental illness. The police deal with the mentally ill every day.
Right.
The psychologically impaired on a regular basis. That may be different from a criminal. The person who is psychologically impaired and that has a knife or a club, a bat, may be very different from the person who has just committed a crime and is looking to hurt someone to get away or wants to hurt the police or whatever. So you have to deal with all these things individually.
Right. Yeah.
It's really crisis management.
Yeah.
So
I know.
Today we teach police officers to try to de-escalate situations like that when they can. It's not always possible.
Right. Right.
The actor, and I'm not saying bad guy, but the actor, the person initiating with a weapon, pretty much from the get-go drives response today, right? If you come at me with a knife, I probably have to shoot you within a certain distance.
Right.
We'd like to change that dynamic. We'd like to give the police more opportunity not to have to use deadly physical force, but maybe some level of force below that. So we give people options. We give them pepper spray, we give them a baton, we give them a taser. Those are all steps that can be utilized situationally. Doesn't mean that every time that a particular instance happens that you can use the same kind of tools.
Right.
Really what we need to do is, and what we try to do is give the police officer a good set of tools.
Right.
Those are physical tools, his handgun, his taser maybe, pepper spray, a baton, handcuffs, and then the training to use probably the best tool in a police officer's arsenal, their mouth and their ability to talk to people.
Right. Right.
So ideally, we would like to, the police respect life across the spectrum. Ideally, we would like no one to get injured in the process of interacting with the police. Unfortunately, it happens.
Right.
It's the reality of policing.
So is there a procedure that you should do this first, you should do it next first, or it's like everything is dependent on the situation?
It is really the best way, Raj, here, in my estimation, and people a lot smarter than me, is to have a free-flowing ability to go where you need, because every situation is dynamic. It is different.
Right, right.
And I think that's what most people, your original question to me was about the public's perception or understanding what policing is.
Right, right.
Police officers are human beings. Everybody's a little different.
Yeah.
They deal with different people all the time.
Yeah.
Even when we deal with the same people over and over. We get calls to the same house all the time. Same person is drunk, same person has some psychological impairment, same person has the same fight with his spouse or children or whatever.
Right.
But every time we go there, it's different. So you have to have this entire range of tool sets. So there's really at one time this use of force continuum was taught in some places, not well, I don't think, as a progression kind of thing. But it's really not. I can use my handgun. I don't have to go through all those steps. I don't have to go through verbal, mace someone, taser someone, strike with a baton, then shoot. I don't. I can start that progression of force any place, and I can also back off of it any place.
Right.
Just because I point my gun at someone at some point, validly so, doesn't mean that my entire interaction with them will have my gun drawn. Right. So it's really situational. It's really it really comes down to circumstances and context.
Wow.
When you put this stuff in context, it really looks different. We are so used today, though, to getting our information immediately.
Absolutely.
Because you get it first doesn't mean you get it right.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
A picture's worth 1,000 words?
Right.
Maybe. but you need to see the pictures before that.
Right. Yeah.
So snippets of things don't really work.
Yep.
You know, it's all about context, and it's all about perspective as well. The perspective oftentimes becomes reality.
Right. Right.
So you really have to, and one of the successful police officers and successful investigators have the ability to take themselves out of, again, I said this earlier, their own bias, and look at something from a different perspective. So I think sometimes the public has to take a look and look at things from the perspective of the police officer or law enforcement official at the time something was going on. The understanding there would probably serve all of us much better.
You know, it's like that when you're wearing your, you know, dress, like a uniform, right? There's totally different, you know, thinking goes on in the people's mind. Rather than if you are wearing a suit and normal clothes, if you come and tell me hi, hello, and different, very different, you know, in my mind, right? When somebody comes with a, you know, with a gun and total like dress, uniform, right?
Well, let's face it. Uniforms, they're uniform for a reason. Everybody looks the same. There should be some sense of anonymity in that when you're looking at a police officer.
Right.
All police officers are readily identifiable, though.
Right.
Most police departments have some kind of shield or badge device and maybe a name tag. But police officers are always identifiable, either by a number or by a name. That's one of the tenets of egalitarian policing. You know, there was a gentleman a couple hundred years ago in England who developed these models of policing. His name was Peel, and one of the things that he said was police officers need to be identifiable.
Right.
Now, whether it's by number or name, that's fine. As long as Bill can go into the police station and say, "I'd like to ask a question about Flanagan or 4262 or whatever it was," so we can identify who the person was that had some interaction. But uniforms have connotations, and they connotate authority. And in fact, the police are an authority. Right? We are some level of government, and a level of government that deals with the public very frequently. So we're readily identifiable to the public.
Right.
Most people never do anything egregious, really wrong or something. So when they're approached by a police officer, maybe on a car stop, maybe you failed to signal a turn, or your brake light's out, and the police officer stops you to tell you your brake light's out, or to inquire why you did something.
Right.
What's the general sense of people? They get, oh,
that's what I'm saying.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
but realistically, there's really no. Why does that happen? What's the psychology of that happening? That's the interesting part.
Right.
Really, there's some advantage to that, and there's a disadvantage from the policing standpoint when that happens.
Right.
The advantage is that if it's some criminal that the interaction is, you want to try to impact them with authority.
Right.
The disadvantage is that if it's someone that I'm going to walk up to the car and let them know their brake light is on, they're going to be anxious and reticent.
Right.
And the relief is when the police officer says, "I wanted to let you know your brake light's out.
Then
go get it fixed."
Right.
Oh, thank you very much, officer.
That's it. Right.
And you go on.
Exactly.
And I'm going to tell you that happens more often than not. It really does. The interaction. If you think about, there's probably 700,000 police officials, officers in the United States. That's obviously tens of millions of interaction between the police and people.
Right.
Think about the infinitesimally small number of those interactions that turn out to be not appropriate. They are really. It's a really small number.
It's a small number, right? Yeah. But like I said, public perception. As soon as somebody stops them, police officers, first they're scared or something.
Sure.
You know.
Sure.
Before you mentioned that, you know, United States people are carrying guns. You know, there's a right to carry gun, right?
Well, it's not, the right to carry guns is different from the right to possess guns. Different states have different laws.
Right.
We're in New York State right now. New York State has a relatively restrictive process to license people to possess certain kinds of weapons, handguns in particular. In New York State, in order to possess a handgun, you need to go to whatever the licensing agency in one of the 62 counties that you live in is. Each one's a little different.
Right.
In upstate New York, The sheriff or the judge may issue a license to possess a handgun relatively with not much of a process. When you're buying a handgun from in New York State, you need to go through a background check, a federal background check to possess a handgun,
Right.
to buy a handgun.
Right.
Then you get locally, that becomes potentially even more restrictive. In the metropolitan area in New York City, on a Long Island, you need the police department, and the police commissioner is the licensing agent. There is a very, very exhaustive background check that you need to go through, and there are levels of licensing that may allow you to carry your handgun outside your home. It's called a concealed carry.
No. Okay.
In other states, there are no regulations. You can walk into a store, buy a gun, and
Right.
carry it wherever you want.
Right.
So
right.
it varies.
Right.
But you have to think about how much that licensed, and let's forget licensed, legally possessed weapons in the United States have a statistically insignificant impact on crime. And I mean that those people who legally possess weapons typically are not involved in any criminal behavior at all.
Right.
There are hundreds of millions of people in the United
Right,
States. There are
right,
hundreds
right.
of millions of weapons.
Right.
The bulk of those people are law-abiding,
Right.
legally possessing them,
Right.
and never a problem. In New York State, last year there were probably maybe 500 some odd murders across the entire state. The bulk of those in the city of New York.
Right.
There are millions of weapons in New
Right.
York State.
Right. Yeah.
Out of those hundreds of murders,
Illegal guns mostly.
illegally possessed by people who are problematic.
Right. Right.
That's a totally different ball of wax here. It really is. There are tens of thousands of legally registered handguns in Nassau and Suffolk counties. Those legally possessed guns are typically never a problem. It is the shooter that's the problem. That's who the problem is.
Yes.
We're talking about an inanimate object that can't get up and walk around by itself, and
Right.
someone has to pull a trigger.
Exactly.
That being said, there's a tremendous responsibility that comes with weapons, firearms ownership. Firearms need to be secured and stored safely. They need to be, the people that utilize them need to be educated in their use and function properly.
Right.
And I think that would go a long way to the understanding between people about what firearms are and what they aren't. They're thought about differently in different parts of the country too.
Right. Yeah. In South, especially, it's open. I mean, the people do believe that they have to carry the weapon because somehow I heard that they don't trust government. I mean, that's the perception.
I don't know. If you could just throw that on the South. I think there are probably people across the United States that have a perception of government that may be
Right.
wary. But look, the Supreme Court of the United States has ruled repeatedly on the ability of citizens of the United States to possess weapons.
Right.
You can regulate them, and we do.
Right.
And we regulate them locally as the constituents of elected officials see fit.
Right.
Don't forget, laws are done by elected officials.
Right, right.
As a result, hopefully, of input from citizens. When they're not, they become unpopular and they don't last long. So it's definitely a topic that you can get a lot of different sides on. But from the police perspective,
Right.
the safe storage and handling of firearms is paramount in the public. Illegal guns, the illegal possession of guns, are a problem for the police. And that's where the police do and should concentrate, really, on the illegal possession of guns and the shooters, the criminals that possess those guns. That's where the emphasis and the resources really should be, and today pretty much is.
Mostly, there are people, I mean, you hear about all these shootings, they're like psychological problem, medication, this and that, and then they shoot and they shoot themselves also.
We've
So
seen
then, I've seen it like many times, right? I mean,
Yeah. Again, look, there's a cost basis to policing. There's a cost basis to everything.
right.
In my view, my opinion, for whatever that's worth, there's a tremendous efficacy in the devotion of resources and the funding of things towards mental illness, the treatment,
Right.
the rehabilitation. It's the same as with drugs. Prevention, treatment, rehabilitation is much less expensive than enforcement.
Right.
Those are the facts.
Right.
So, from the standpoint of the horrific incidents we've seen involving firearms
Right.
and psychiatrically impaired people,
Right.
what came first here? The psychiatrically impaired person was there, and most of these circumstances, unfortunately, after they happen, people come out of the woodwork and say, "Oh yeah, John Jones. Everybody knew that he was this."
Right.
Well, if everybody knew, why didn't someone say something?
Right.
Where was the treatment?
Right.
Where was if it's problematic behavior, where was the intervention?
Right.
We really need to look at those kinds of things, and that goes far beyond a law enforcement issue. That goes to a mental health issue. The investment in mental health in the United States is really critical. Many of the people that law enforcement come across are in some way impaired people from a psychiatric or standpoint. That is problematic. And there's got to be a way to deal with those people. Fortunately, most of those people are not violent. Again, we're talking about a very, very small subset.
Number, right. Very
really,
small
really
number.
small.
Right, yeah.
That do horrific things.
Right, yeah.
But again, let's jump back to the media. This is about knowing something immediately as it happens.
Right.
These kinds of incidents have gone on through recorded history in the United States.
Yep.
Some of the earliest bombings of schools
Right.
took place in the early 1900s.
Right.
Horrific.
Right.
Tens of people were killed in multiple things. Incidents of people running amok with edged weapons. In China not too long ago, a deranged individual killed 20-something people on a train platform with a knife.
Right.
We don't, do we have to deal with the knife? No, we need to deal with the impairment, the psychiatric impairment.
Right.
That's key.
That's the key. Right.
That's really the key.
Yep.
And training, and the police are more and more moving towards training of police officers in dealing with people who are mentally disturbed or ill. So it's important.
It's very important.
It's an important part of policing.
Yep. You mentioned that you were head of investigations, right?
Well, part of my job
your
was
job.
to take a look at different aspects of investigations. A large part of my career was done in an investigative area, whether that was narcotics or financial related crimes or asset forfeiture. So,
Describe, the process that you go through, like where the information is coming from, then what you do, then how do you reach from place A through Z?
it's a process, and it's a process that, again, there are norms in everything, but it's all, again, situationally dependent, right? But there are some basics. The basics to investigation are who, what, why, where, and when. Okay, if we can answer those things, we go a long way toward figuring out what something is. Who committed the crime? What kinds of avenues do we take to find out who perpetrated a particular act?
Right.
Today, we live in a technologically advanced world.
Right.
Many venues are under some type of electronic surveillance. So one of the best tools today for the police are surveillance cameras.
Right.
Usually
Right.
privately held. Let's take a crime that occurs on the streets of Manhattan. The New York City Police Department knows where those private cameras are. Something happens in the street. A detective goes out. He looks around. He finds those cameras. He'll talk to the building owners or the business owner. Gets that video evidence. Take a look at it. Run that face through some databases, maybe. A lot of this is old-fashioned getting out and talking to people. It's about developing witnesses.
Right.
Who saw? Who was there?
Right.
Who
right,
saw what
right,
happened?
Right.
It's connect the dots. There's a basic part of it. Then when you get into other kinds of investigations, it becomes a little more sophisticated. One of the things I always caution against to new investigators is what I call investigative myopia, investigative short-sightedness. We want to leave our view and our minds open to
Right.
possibilities
Right.
and not narrow something down immediately.
Right.
So good investigators take in a lot of information, process information
Right.
well from very disparate sources, and build a good, solid case. Because ultimately what we want to do is we want to be able to prosecute a case.
Right.
We don't want to have holes in that case. What we really want to do is present that case. Ultimately, we want to arrest someone for committing the crime,
Right.
and then give it to the prosecuting agency, and have them have the ability to say to the defense side, "This is what we have,
Right. Right.
and let's not expend more of the people's money. Let's have your client take a plea to something,
Right.
and we're all ahead of the game."
Right,
The
right,
game here.
right.
The end result is always justice.
Right.
It's not about punishment. It's about justice. It's about what's fair in
Right.
a lot of different circumstances. That's a key tenet of policing. It's about being fair. So you should be fair in your investigation as well. When you have a short-sightedness or target something for inappropriate reasons, that's not right, it's not fair, and it's not justice. So that's something that investigators really should take a look at. Now, in that investigative process, we use all kinds of things. We use, as we
Right.
talked about,
Right.
some technical things. We interview witnesses. A lot of it is about the experience of the investigator, understanding how things fit into boxes or into a pattern. We'll go out, find witnesses, talk to those people, and again, the skill set of eliciting information, getting people to talk to me,
Right.
being able to understand what's important and what's not in that story, being able to discern the truthfulness or the veracity
Right.
of what someone's talking about. That's important. Eyewitnesses. Now, the camera is unblinking. It catches things.
Right.
Doesn't mean that what you see is really what transpired. Think about
Right.
that.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But the human mind is interesting too. Eyewitnesses are not the most reliable thing in the world, as we've found in many different ways, because everybody sees something from a little different perspective.
Different way. Right. Yeah.
So we need to be careful as investigators as we go and we talk to people about what that person's bias may be in viewing something. Very important. Physical evidence, very important. The advances in crime scene investigation over the last few decades are incredible, specifically really to DNA. The collection of DNA, the collection and analysis of DNA
Right,
in
right.
crime scenes
Right.
has become so important.
Right.
Because as we know, DNA is specific to
Every
individuals.
individual. Right.
So there's some really definitive ability to place someone at crime scenes, which goes a long way to the egalitarianism and the fairness and the justice in policing. We see today how many people have been wrongfully convicted,
Right.
exonerated by DNA evidence
Right.
from
Yep.
a long time ago.
Later on.
So the world has changed, and it's changed really for the better. The investigating detective is responsible for a tremendous amount of information, collating that information, putting it in some cogent form that you can give to a prosecutor to take to the next part of the step. Because we are police are one part of a step here, and the relationships between those different parts, law enforcement, the prosecutor, the judiciary, are all very interrelated and
Right.
important.
Right. Right.
Good investigators, some people have an innate talent to be able to talk to people. Couple that with a rational mind and an ability, hopefully, to maybe think outside the box a little and put something together. And then the training you receive to do investigations, all go to giving a good product. And hopefully, at the end of that product, the result is the actor in a criminal event gets arrested and is brought before the court for justice to be
For
served.
justice, right? Yeah. You know, the investigation for the financial crimes, right? You know, we talked about a little bit before that. How do you do that? Like, you know, you put a wiretap and.
Well, again,
So-
let's go to some historical kinds
Right,
of things.
right.
Financial crimes.
Right.
You know, for the last 10 years, there's been, on a federal level,
Right.
some very aggressive prosecutions of financial
Right.
matters. What they typically come from is either a whistleblower inside, someone providing information that there is some nefarious deed going on inside, or an examination, somebody's been victimized, and people start to look back. So in a financial crime, there's a couple of different trails. You have a paper trail, typically. So you need subject matter experts. You need CPAs and financial investigators to go back and take a look at those things. It may be an ongoing crime. So in that process, if it's an ongoing crime and you can identify someone who's participating in it,
Right.
You may approach that person and his legal representative,
Right.
and let them know that they're either going to be arrested or they're subject of the investigation, and maybe they want to cooperate. At that point, there are technical means to, as we've seen historically, to use electronic surveillance, whether they be wiretaps or wiring up someone to go and have conversations with people who are ongoingly committing these kinds of events. And people typically cooperate in the hopes of getting more lenient treatment at the end of their case.
Right. Right.
And those are very formal agreements that are drawn up. There's a lot of scrutiny to that. They're carefully weighed before a participant in some criminal enterprise is afforded the opportunity to become a cooperating individual. A lot of review and a lot of scrutiny from many levels within the law enforcement community, including the prosecutorial agencies. They're really involved in. They decide ultimately whether someone becomes a cooperating witness or not. So, but there are those kind of cases that you could not make probably without, and by make I mean bring to fruition,
Right.
without the cooperation of some of those people.
Right.
That holds in financial crimes, it holds in narcotics investigations, and sometimes even in some other kinds of crimes where you a burglary ring or crew or something. You want to infiltrate them somehow. It's very interesting,
Interesting.
and
Yeah, it
it's
is
more like it's taking
Yeah.
investigation to the next level. It's moving from playing checkers to chess.
Right. Right.
All well thought of, all well thought out, with people who are intimately involved in the legalities of these kind of things, because the police, law enforcement, and the prosecutors do exist within a legal framework. There are things that you can and can't do, and we're very cognizant of what the rules are. It's important to play by the rules.
Agree. Let's talk about homeland security, the threats coming from all over the world, how homeland security departments tackles with these threats, and kind of, you know, we have always seen like many times that there was a potential for bombing and it kind of, you know, they took care of it or whatever. So how does that work?
Well, Raj, you understand living in the shadow of the New York City skyline, what we've experienced in the New York metropolitan area. Unfortunately, September 11th during the attacks on the United States, and they were attacks on the United States.
Right.
So, from a federal perspective,
Right.
governments exist and countries exist to protect their population.
Right.
We obviously have standing armies, Air Force, Navy, and we've historically done well in the military vein to protect our borders. Today, the threat is a little more insidious and a little different.
Right.
It comes from outside. It comes from people who are totally dedicated to philosophies and ways of life that are alien to people, not just in the United States, but in any free place in the world. Terrorism is not being the target of terrorism is not exclusive to the United States, as we see. Terrorists in different forms, for different reasons, operate worldwide and have for centuries. Really.
Right,
We've
right.
changed the name of,
Right.
of what we may call them today.
Right.
But specific to the United States,
Right.
certain actors in the international world see the United States as the purveyor of all the ills that may ail them.
Right.
Other individuals and groups see the United States as the bulwark of whatever entity that they're against in their own localities. We, as U.S. citizens, travel around the world. We take a lot of good things with us in our businesses and our diplomatic relationships with people. But we are a symbol that many people would like to poke in the eye, at
Right.
the least. So specifically over the last 14 years, the United States has developed a relatively robust and multifaceted defense outside of the military to threats from what I'll term terrorists.
Right. Right.
That goes from the federal government to local policing. I probably really have to talk about the overseas part of this to get and then come back into the U.S. What we see happening in other countries
Right.
are really practice sessions, for the most part, for what these terrorists would like to do in the U.S. Things that we've seen, the utilization of aircraft as weapons. They've happened overseas before.
Right.
The utilization of people as human carriers of bombs
Right.
happens around the world. The attacks on infrastructure, specifically, and the thing I think we should really talk about is mass transit, has been going on now for a couple of decades overseas.
Right.
We've seen it in India.
Yep.
We've seen it in Spain. We've seen it in the UK. We saw it in France recently.
Yep.
If you think about how many people around the world in nations that have transportation infrastructure have been attacked in those transportation areas, it's very disturbing. The United States has a robust mass transit, especially in the New York, big cities, New York, Boston, Chicago, L.A. You know, we have subways and trains and buses. They are all vulnerable. We know inside the law enforcement and intelligence community that those actors overseas would like to perpetrate the same kinds of activities here within the United States.
Right.
Because they are vulnerable.
Right. Right.
Post September 11th, we tightened up our ability to screen airline related issues, people and cargo. You see some attempts to do the same thing in our transportation infrastructure. Today, if you go into Grand Central Station in New York or Washington, Union Station in Washington, Penn Station in New York,
Right.
you'll see a very, very visible presence of law enforcement and military
Yep. Yep.
individuals working hand in hand to protect and to have a presence
Right.
in those venues. But if you come out to Long Island,
Yeah.
although there is police assigned to the Metropolitan Transit Authority on the trains, there are New York State troopers that ride the trains. The geographical expanse of Long Island makes it impractical at this point to provide police presence on every station, every platform,
Right.
every train car.
Right.
So what I'd like to talk about somewhere down the line is where the citizens' responsibility comes in when the police aren't there, and we'll go down that road. But we know from intelligence, from exploited documents, from things that have happened right here on Long Island. There was a former resident of Long Island arrested in Pakistan and brought back to the United States who had planned on disrupting mass transit in the area. He went overseas. He was radicalized. He planned this. He came back here, and unfortunately, he was caught. Law enforcement intelligence communities today are working every day to mitigate that possibility and potential.
Right.
The problem becomes that these lone actors, popularly we call them lone wolves.
Right.
I don't call them wolves. Wolves travel in packs.
Right.
And wolves have a purpose.
Right.
They help each other. These are lone actors. These are more like rogues than anything.
Right.
These are people who have become radicalized.
Right.
Who may not be on anyone's radar screen, may not be being watched, may surface at any time. Those are the people who are probably the most potentially impactful in our world today.
Right.
That person who can illegally obtain a firearm, find his way onto a commuter train and try to shoot people. Those people who may try to cobble together some kind of explosive device. The counter to that is that our intelligence community and our law enforcement community have become much better at the detection, surveillance, and interception of those kinds of individuals than we were prior to September 11th. So what we'd really like to do within our world, my world, is to identify, look at, disrupt, and then dismantle networks of these people. That's really the way we do that, and we do that by utilizing partners around the world. The New York Police Department, New York City Police Department was at the forefront of putting people in overseas assignments so they could talk to people similarly situated in places where these things are occurring on a regular basis. Phenomenal program, and in my mind, people will criticize it as not paying dividends. It has paid dividends. This is about communication. It's about communication between like entities. Governments have a responsibility to protect their people. These are not governments waging war at this point, although some entities like ISIS are becoming quasi-state-like. They have a almost state-like presence. They have a purpose, a collective. Back in the 60s when the Soviet Union was around and the United States was here, we both had nuclear weapons. It was mutually assured destruction. We both had a lot to lose.
Right.
And in state-sponsored areas, we both have a lot to lose.
Right.
But when you're a non-state, what do you have to lose?
Right.
So you have to really deal with those kinds of things differently. And today, the people coming into the pipeline may not be state actors, but they may be acting at the behest of some quasi-state or entity. Interestingly enough, there are obviously some state-sponsored terrorist groups that we've identified, and those state-sponsored, people who know who they are. Iran sponsors terrorists. North Korea sponsors terrorists.
Yep.
They're probably the two largest today. The Middle East is embroiled today, almost civil war in some places, and an emerging new actor in ISIS.
Right.
ISIS has become, through force of social media outside the territory they're in, a significant factor. Disaffected people, for whatever reason, can be radicalized by long distance through social media.
Right.
Can be goaded into action, and often can be successful at what they've done. You've seen that in Europe.
Yeah.
They've made attempts here
Yeah. Yeah.
because we do, with the cooperation of many authorities, the federal authorities, local authorities, we try to identify people who might be in those positions early. We may, when I say we, I mean law enforcement, may give them some path that they can potentially go down, so we're taking them out of that, which you see a lot, right? We see people who engage in conspiracies and arrested before that they can fulfill that. They have the willingness and the mindset to do it.
Right.
We're aware of them, but before they become operational, they get arrested. Sometimes they get arrested with some fake explosives that they think they bought for real from some.
Right.
They're not being entrapped. They are willing to do this. Law enforcement is providing the end for them to complete it, and they can't, which is good.
Right. Right.
But for every one of those, we don't know how many are out there that aren't. Which is why it's incumbent on people who become aware, like the potentially violent, mentally impacted individual. You have other people engaged in these kinds of behaviors that people know about.
Right.
And they should be letting someone know that this person's potentially a problem. It makes us all safer.
So that is citizens' responsibility, basically.
It is, just as it's see something, say something.
Right,
How do we deal with the mass transit issue?
Right.
Obviously, there are awareness campaigns. Everybody now knows. I don't think that you could get on an airplane today, flying from New York to California, and if somebody jumped up and tried to get into the flight deck, there'd be 15 people on top of him.
Right.
Today. We learned our lesson.
Right. Right.
We saw that recently in France when the 3 Americans jumped on and overpowered the man with the weapon on the train.
Yep. Yep.
We will not let that happen collectively today. So when things in mass transit, that's where the see something, say something comes from. If you see a package somewhere, you should report it to someone. If you see someone with a camera taking pictures on a regular basis in some place where they shouldn't be, some piece of infrastructure, some power plant, some generating facility, some train yard, some switch, well, we should call the police at that point. And as we talked about before, the police have the right to go talk to someone, ask them what they're doing there.
Right. Right.
We're not infringing on anyone by doing that. And there's even the adoption of technology.
Right.
There are applications out there, see something, say something applications that can be utilized. The power of that thing that we all carry around, that smartphone,
there you go.
Can aid law enforcement in those kind of things. And it doesn't have to be just about terrorism. I mean, really, it could be about a pothole or some dangerous condition or whatever.
Right.
But don't we have a responsibility as citizens to help and to let people know about that? So that's really where that is. Internationally, I'm going to tell you that we in the United States have made tremendous strides in fighting terrorists before they get here. We have. That coupled with the ability to share information and intelligence now has made us safer. Although this is probably, in my estimation, the most dangerous time we've been in post 9/11. Let's go back years ago. In the 60s and the 70s, people used, and I'll use the term terrorism or acts of terrorism, to further their cause or get attention.
Right.
Relatively ineffective if you think about it.
Right.
Today, when you have entity like ISIS, they don't have an argument with a government in particular. They have an argument with, they're looking to take over, not to get back, but to expand, to dominate.
Right.
And they're sending their emissaries, for lack of a better word, in the form of these radicalized individuals to do the advance work.
Right.
While they, as a group, try to find some way to do something bigger and much more damaging. So we always have to be cognizant of that. People will dismiss them as ineffective. Well, they might not. They're probing. Part of Sun Tzu, probe and find weakness. there appears to be a more than willing cadre of those people willing to probe. On the other side, we have professionals who are preventing them from realizing their goals, and that's a good thing.
But ISIS is a bigger threat than normal terrorism or normal terrorists, right? Because ISIS also has money. It's like a really organized group rather than just small shells acting something like that.
Right. Well, we're in a quasi-state
Right.
at that
Yeah.
point. They are not.
Yeah.
I mean, they would tell you that they are a state, and
Right.
it's
Right.
fundamentally the
Right.
translation of ISIS, where we say ISIS, is state
Right.
on
Right.
their side.
Yeah.
And yes, they do. They tax people. They have oil revenues.
Yeah.
They
Yep.
they have the ability to underwrite things.
Yep.
So right now they're really at a zero investment when they radicalize someone.
Right.
What's their investment? They don't have to invest.
Right, right.
They can husband their resources for
Right.
something else. So really, yeah, they are obviously an imminent threat to the people in the countries that they're active in.
Right.
And think about it. I mean, there's essentially a genocide going on from Christian populations within those places,
Right.
and the surrounding states that are their neighbors are very, very concerned about their cross-border potential from Syria to Libya.
Right.
Libya across the Mediterranean into the European continent is not a big leap here.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
we need to be cognizant that you can't dismiss these people. They need to be dealt with, and better minds than mine are dealing with them internationally. But locally, at home, we need to be cognizant that these lone actors can be radicalized and can pose a threat.
Right.
Maybe not to the institutions of the United States, but
Right.
you think about the places where people gather in the United States:
Right.
mass transit,
Right.
theaters,
Right.
shopping centers.
Right.
It doesn't take much for individuals who are driven by these terrible thoughts
Hatred or whatever.
to create a lot of damage.
Right. Right.
Again, nothing that's going to tear the institutions of the United States apart, but they will, they'll damage the public's faith in those open public spaces, which is a problem.
Isn't that ISIS was basically Saddam's old army?
Well, ISIS has morphed tremendously from many different factors. I'm not an ISIS expert from the genealogy of ISIS, but it's grown so quickly because there's power in a vacuum. And what happened in Iraq?
Right.
There was a vacuum.
Right.
The Syrian-based issue is something, the civil warfare really in Syria has given them another opportunity.
Right.
And the same, in Libya, the downfall of Gaddafi has really, there's a void.
Right.
And what takes, it's going from, heat leaves to go to a cold space. Voids are always filled by something. The nature of matter is you need to fill a void. And ISIS is filling a void. There is no, or there's an ineffective power structure there.
Right.
We've tried. I mean,
Right.
it may have been a strategic mistake on the part of the United States to leave Iraq
Right.
The way we did.
Right.
As untenable as the continued involvement was to many people from a military standpoint, we left a vacuum. And in that vacuum came a force driven by, the Islamic fundamentalist really filled that void
Right.
in what is really a secular state. If we think about what Iraq was, a relatively secular place at one time,
Yep.
the void's been filled.
What been right.
Right.
Yep.
And they are, ISIS in particular is looking to expand and export. That's a problem.
Right. Right.
So we need to identify, disrupt, and dismantle their.
It's not easy to do because the way they do it is like they just sit in a like within the people, common people, right? So it's not easy to identify like what it is like, you know, in like few minutes they can become a warrior, and in few minutes they can become a common person.
Well, that's the nature of warfare today, for the most part.
Yeah.
If it's not state
Yeah.
versus state,
Right.
look, we saw that problem in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
From a military standpoint, we saw it in Vietnam. The United States has a history of being involved in these kind of things where it's not. We're not pitting our army against another. It's not tank battles here anymore.
Right, exactly.
So it takes a different kind of soldier. It
Right.
takes a different kind of
Right.
military approach,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and I think that, look, I know people in those positions. They think about this every day, and
Right.
their execution of it is tremendous, given the constraints they have to work under from a political standpoint.
Right, right, right.
If you unleashed our forces with the capabilities that I am familiar with them having, we wouldn't be having these conversations. But there are obviously political considerations here.
Yep, agree. Yeah. Well, Bill, you know, I really want to thank you for the wealth of knowledge that you have given to our viewers, and obviously, you know, it's really tremendous information that today we have given to the people.
Thank you, Raj. My pleasure being here. And
Yeah.
and you know, I'm really, the people that need to be acknowledged are the people that do the law enforcement job every day on the street, and our military people.
Right,
You know,
right.
these people work under some incredible conditions.
Right.
And I think hopefully we touched on some of what their real situations are, as opposed to the perceptions. But both in law enforcement and the military, we really need to appreciate the people that do the work. You know, those of us that were managers and things, it's easier than
Right.
than actually being out there doing the work. It really is. There really needs to be an appreciation of the men and women, and there are a lot of women out there doing this today. Very, very important that they be acknowledged. So say hello to your local police person when you see them.
Absolutely, and we do appreciate their, you know, duty to the people of the country. So we do definitely do that. Yeah.
Great. It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. If you have any questions, comments, you can email me at rajmitv@gmail.com. That again, rajmitv@gmail.com. You can watch our prior shows on YouTube at youtube.com/Infosys International. That's again youtube.com/Infosys International. Until next time, have a great week.